Hello, I am Addison, and this is Cannabis Clip Notes with Angie Roullier. Angie is an educator and an advocate. She's also an author. Her first book, Hot for the People, the, the Plant, the People, and Shop Policies of Cannabis, sorts through the history and science of cannabis based on research and Angie's 12 years of personal interactions and talking with medical marijuana patients, working with vendors and shop owners, and then seeking out information and references from scientists. She's a firm believer that targeted and tailored cannabinoid and terpene medicine is the future of the industry. In the first 10 years of Angie's 15 years in the cannabis space, she has worked as a budtender, she has worked in management, in administration, and most importantly, in patient relationships and patient education. Now she's bringing this knowledge and insights to the pages of her latest book, Budtender's Blueprint, Compassion and Chemistry at the Cannabis Counter. This is scheduled for pre-sales this fall 2025. Now, Angie, I think it's so important for people who want to get in the cannabis industry to start out as a bud tender because it really gives them a quick education about the industry. And then also it appears that bud tenders transition into management. So what is that transition from being a bud tender into management like?
Well, actually, it almost gives you superpowers. If you have been a bud tender for long enough, and then you move over into management, you know what's going on. Okay, so you know their pains, you know the situations. You knew those times when you needed a solid manager to stand up. Well, now you can be that manager. You can stand up for your employees, knowing some of the nonsense that actually goes on every day in this circus that we call cannabis retail. Now, your duties have changed. Your focus has changed. Now you are going to focus more on your staff than you are the actual consumer. So that shift does take a little bit of getting used to. So now instead of you trying to push the product out the door, you are now focused on making sure that that product is behind the counter for distribution. You have evolved from collecting the cash to moving it out of the drawers and making sure that that gets into its safe space. Again, your focus is going to shift to your staff. And if you have worked with the bud tenders around you, long enough as a bud tender yourself before you move over to management, you've probably gotten to know them and you know why they take cannabis. So it really helped me to know, okay, it's getting really crazy and loud in here. I know, Sarah's eye is starting to twitch. Go relieve Sarah. Pull her off of that register, tell her to go take a smoke break, tell her to go get some fresh air, be back in 10 minutes. And, just give your staff the tools that they need to do the best that they can when it's going on back there, because we all know how absolutely crazy it can get. And if you think that, the end of your bud tending duties is over now that you're management, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. You're going to be covering lunch breaks. You're going to be covering those, oh my God, Sarah's going to snap, go take 15 minutes. You're the one who's going to belly up. You are also going to belly up behind the counter when there is an issue. So let's say, one of your bud tenders is struggling with a customer and you could tell. I mean, you hear it, you're within earshot. And you've got to know when to step up and kind of intervene and, help out your bud tender and make sure that it gets resolved if at all possible. And not only resolved, but retain that customer, in the same turn and hold on to your Budtender. There's a huge turnover in Budtenders in this industry, and a lot of it is because they're not seen. They don't feel like they're being seen. They're not supported. They know that, you know, a lot of places, if they go to management, it's frowned upon or they're considered problematic. To where I always welcomed, you know, people, you know, come to me, you know, take that 10-minute break, come on in, you know, vent, get it off your chest. But you do have to go back to work. But it always made me feel good knowing that they knew that I was there for them. Paying attention to their sensitivities. You know, like I said, you know, if, you know, Sarah, you know, gets a little bit overwhelmed when it's loud and it's hot. Let's say, you know that, you know, Jackson, you know, uses cannabis for his anxiety, but he took the first lunch that day. And it has been 7 hours since that lunch. You know, maybe, you know, stop again, take his place at the counter and send him out for a 15-20 break. One thing that it really never really dawned on me, and I actually felt bad once it did. Where the last pot shop that I had worked at, about half of the staff smoked cigarettes. So they were always coming to me, you know, hey, Ange, can I pop out for a smoke? You know, usually a 10-minute break. And as long as we weren't busy or there wasn't, you know, much else going on, absolutely, you know, go knock yourself out. And then one day I had a girl come to me who didn't smoke. And she's like, where's my smoke break? And I'm like, oh, I'm the worst. You know, I felt terrible because, you know, I had no problem allowing the cigarette smokers to go out a couple times after their lunch break, you know, to get that hit of nicotine. But I had completely forgotten and, you know, left to the side those that actually don't smoke. So I took it upon myself to actually make sure that everybody got their, you know, their break, whether they were consuming, you know, nicotine or not. So the pay isn't great in cannabis retail. It really isn't. So the best that you can do as a manager is make sure that they feel seen and supported. And in my next clip notes, I'll be addressing how shop policies can absolutely make or break your business, and they can make all the difference in retaining your customers and your budtenders.
Now, all of Angie's cannabis clip notes will be available on the Women's Cannabis Chamber of Commerce website, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and all our other social media platforms.